Well, hello, this is Dr. Tom Ashton. I think it's 3 o'clock, a little bit after, and we're ready to go. So we're getting organized. Sorry that we're not totally organized, but how you doing? Hope you're doing great. We're going to do a very interesting program today. But before I get into the real part of the teachings of the day, I'm going to make a couple of comments about the pandemic. Just as a review, I mean, I think you're probably all keeping pretty much up with it, but we are in a phase now where we're going to start working our way back. So I think that it's absolutely necessary that we do that, but I want to stress that even though we're working our way back, we're opening it up. You still have personal responsibility to take care of yourself and to take care of your family, take care of your situation, so that you can remain free of this particular virus that's running around our country. We're going to get rid of it soon, but just be cautious. We want you out there. We want to get everybody back to work. And I will have, there was a comment that I had gone out a couple of days yesterday with the video about my vein center. I'm going to open up the vein center on May the 12th. And someone was saying, oh my gosh, how dare you open up an elective vein center when we're not open yet. But situation is with veins, you may not realize, but there are some emergency problems with venous disease. It can be acute bleeding, it could be thrombosis, it could be an ulcer that needs treated. And I have lots of patients out there that need immediate care. And that's why I'm going to go ahead and open up, because at that point, I don't consider it an elective procedure. I consider it a necessary procedure. But anyway, that's where we're going with that. So I want to talk about our subject of the day, which is your perfect imperfections. So this is going to be an interesting trip for you if you've never considered some of my concepts here. But I have noticed in my life that a lot of things that I thought were horrible and terrible turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. And so I studied a lot of metaphysical concepts, and I came up with these ideas based on that. So we're going to go through this very slowly, and I hope that when you see something you don't understand or you have a question, you go ahead and enter that question, and then we'll be talking about that, taking up your questions later as we go toward the end. Okay, so here we go with first statement I'd like to tell you is that every saint was a man before he was a saint. So, you know, if you think you're not perfect, you are perfect even as you're developing through your life. But since your imperfections are perfect, it means that you are perfect. This is what we're going to go through, a sequence of thought patterns that will hopefully lead you to have a better viewpoint about yourself. If you have more leading towards self-validation rather than trying to be validated by your culture or your herd or your team or your tribe, if you have self-validation, you are truly free. So we're going to go through a sequence of events here, and we're going to start first talking about the day of your birth. As a first attempt to gather what that day must have been like, we have to think of what life was like in the womb before you were born. In short, it was 9 months of pure bliss and continued comfort. In this phase of your creation, you were still very much connected to the perfection that we all share. There was no reason for you to feel or know anything else at that point other than perfection. Then, the moment of your birth, you began to experience separation from infinite wisdom for the first time. My contention is that we came from infinity, we have life on earth, and we will return to infinity after that episode. Before our birth, we were basically united with infinite intelligence. And then we were separated from that on the day of our birth. So it's no wonder that we cried so much. This new human experience was entirely unpleasant. On the day of your birth, you began to experience what I call the separation. That very unpleasant feeling established the basis of your present state of being. If you were physically nurtured and sustained by caring parents, you survived and you thrived. And if you were abused and neglected, your separation anxiety multiplied as your perception of reality was ingrained into your subconscious mind. But we all, even if we had a great environment, a great family, we all experienced some separation. However, as time went on, you learned the opposite of perfection and the opposite of contentment, because you learned that love was conditional. You were taught then that you were not perfect. And you learned that no matter what you did, you could never get enough of anything. You learned the opposite of perfect contentment. And you learned that love was conditional. Now, I want to explain what I mean by conditional love. And I want you to start thinking about how you use love as a control mechanism. In other words, we have a tendency to say, I love you, therefore I can control you. And this is the thing we learn as we go along. By the age of 3, we find out that the unconditional love we thought existed in our lives no longer exists. We found that everything we do is conditioned. In other words, what I want you to do with this little project, now no one's going to see this. You might want to take a picture of this or write it down, but I want you to start thinking about the way you personally use love as a conditional emotion. How are you using love to control someone? For example, if you're in a relationship, you might say, I will love this person if they do this, this, and this. It's putting a condition on your love. So if love is conditional, it is a form of control. In other words, if I love you, I can therefore control you. In your life, I'm sure that there are times when you have done that. You have controlled someone or some situation by withholding your love and admiration for that person. Now, why do we do this? Well, all of us got to a state like that because even though our parents did what they thought was right, they did a process called domestication. They domesticated us, and they did their best, and they taught us their values, their language, and their culture. But they also ingrained their fears and doubts, their religion, their prejudices, their addictions into our own consciousness. And by the way, we will call these negative aspects that have been ingrained into our subconsciousness, we call those detractors. Our mind is full of detractors. With these detractors dragging us down over the years, most of us now have become just like our parents, even with all their imperfections, and it doesn't stop there. We will eventually become agents that help perpetuate the insanity in our careers and families and business dealings and relationships. we will perpetuate the insanity. And I do not mean to lay the blame on our parents, but later on in life, our teachers did not teach us well. They taught us that our intuition is not dependable. They taught that we must accept ideal standards of control if we expect to get a reward. And that right there is what I mean by conditional love. We learned that we can only be validated if we make someone else feel right. At almost no point in our schooling and upbringing did anyone allow us to follow our intuition and be spontaneous. And we rarely, if ever, actually experienced unconditional love. Our core beliefs and self-image became twisted and deformed into an insane pattern of cultural conformity accompanied by the detractors. So our culture teaches us this is the way you look, this is what you eat, this is the way you act, and you are not good enough, you're not strong enough, you have all these negative detractors. And so those things have haunted us through our entire lives. And collectively, our teachers and peer groups, their favorite word was always no. No one ever told us how perfectly amazing we are. Through this constant emphasis on things we were not supposed to do, we slowly learned that we were not perfect. Our core beliefs and self-image became twisted and deformed into an insane pattern of cultural conformity accompanied by the detractors. And we learned to assume roles during this upbringing. We become a daughter, a student, a friend, brother, sister, lover, spouse, a father, or a mother. And the consequence of these relationships is always dictated by love based on some condition. The overreaching lesson is that everything is conditional. Every act of love comes with a price, and love means control. In other words, we slowly learn that I love you also means I control you. Through this harsh lesson, we came to realize that it's good to gain comfort and avoid pain at any cost, and to gain attention and escape being ignored. We had to gain approval and escape rejection. So this became our overriding goal, is to gain approval by falling into line, do what you're told. And we had to do this to escape feeling inferior. These values were molded into our consciousness and continue even now, right today, to control our thoughts and actions and ambitions and relationships. And we learned that it was either their way or the highway. On the world stage, these erroneous values, now ingrained in all of us, our entire collective consciousness throughout the planet, it's created chaos. And this chaos exists everywhere on the planet. In such a threatening environment, how can we learn to have empathy for others and self-reliance? Because the true self-destruction, the true exodus from perfection, it begins when we start seeking validation from our position in respect to everything we learned from the people and culture that raised us. Think about that phrase up there. The true self-destruction begins when we stop thinking of ourselves as validated by ourselves, but only validated by external situations, people, and circumstances. And it doesn't matter who we are, eventually there comes a time when we seek validation in everything we do. Your entire life becomes seeking some sort of validation from someone else. Through all the negativity that surrounds us, we find ourselves needing to know that we are acknowledged and respected and heard and not marginalized and not dismissed. For example, even when we check ourselves in the mirror each day, we validate that we are ready to face the world by comparing our appearance to the sum of everyone else in our culture. Do I look like them? If I look like them, I'll be accepted by them. And when we ask an opinion of someone else, we are seeking not really an answer, but rather their validation. In these ways, we always seek personal validation from someone other than ourselves. It's no secret why so many of us have become driven by this hollow kind of validation. Receiving acknowledgement and validation from others, it's an incredible rush. It feels like genuine respect and always provides a sense of security and belonging. It keeps us from feeling worthless and dismissed as immature or crazy. This is why we keep doing it. It makes us feel like we belong. In the extreme, needing validation from external sources like our culture often results in fanatical belief systems with potential to sustain conflict between individuals, groups, religions, and countries. So this discomfort is so motivating that it becomes the primary driver of our behaviors, attitudes, worldviews, and most of our unhappiness. The driver of our unhappiness is our need to experience validation from external sources. So we might have been born perfect, and we were born perfect. The moment of birth, our computer system was completely blank and ready to be downloaded with material. The material that was downloaded into our little computers was faulty. No one ever told us of our divine nature, of our perfection, and no one ever told us how amazing life is. We might have been born perfect, but through our need for validation, we have become slaves and victims. So over the years, we became all these things based on negative lessons. We were no longer who we really were. Rather, we became a fabrication and a false persona. As we grew, the suggestions that formed this false persona stayed and grew with us, becoming quite powerful in the process. Our egocentric focus became an overwhelming force in our lives. So it's the ego-based perspective. It's created a species divided by race, religion, culture, language, values, a veritable hell on earth. We were taught all these things and shaped into this egocentric way in an effort to keep us safe and happy. The result is a personality based on false understanding of who we are, how we align with the rest of the world. We are not happy. We are stressed. We are overwhelmed. We are unfulfilled, and we are afraid. It's because of our false personalities and inflated egos, we have not found happiness. Rather, we have created a world of sustained chaos. How did all this come to pass? Are not all human beings desirous of joy and perfection? Well, yes. We are simply operating from a fundamental misunderstanding of our role in the universe. And that misunderstanding stems from our collective mismanagement of our most tremendous gift, which is self-awareness. Now, in the known world, We are the only beings that are self-aware. In our great self-awareness, I want you to imagine the life of, maybe you have a pet at home, a cat. If you have a cat at home, notice how contented that cat is as long as it's running around, chasing something, getting something to eat, and mostly sleeping and hanging out. So, how does your happiness compare to that of a cat? May I suggest that you are not as happy and content as your pet? Why do you suppose that is? Your first instinct will be to say, well, it's because I have more responsibilities and obligations. Yes, you have a job, you have mouths to feed, bills to pay, but these things are all incidental when compared to your ultimate contentment. Before we continue, let's consider the exercise. Think in your own mind what goes on in the mind of your pets. It's mostly tranquility as long as they're fed and warm and have a place to sleep. So you are unhappy compared to the cat because you have been wounded every day of your life. Throughout your upbringing, negativity has dominated your sensory input. You fell into a human trap of believing that all this negativity is the truth. Your self-talk, your self-talk, thoughts in your mind based almost solely on a lifetime of learning what you cannot do or should not do now rules your days and nights. Even when you don't realize it, you are doing it. You are turning this negative self-talk, which I call detractors, you're turning them over and over in your mind, day after day. And the troubling part is this negative self-talk stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of the universe. And this is why we're here today. There is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the universe works and is. We have been taught our whole lives that we are imperfect and undeserving of contentment. How else can the world turn out but other than in pure chaos based on those teachings? All our lives, we have believed this lie. Just think about where all that negativity comes from. It's all based on a belief system that your family and your peers have shaped for you since birth. It all comes from the environments we have created for ourselves. We spend countless hours wounding ourselves every day with negative self-talk. And the worst part, all that negativity is based on falsehoods. Falsehoods. Your thinking process on a daily basis is based on false assumptions and false teachings. Consider the top 3 falsehoods that plague us each day, 24/7. We are not good enough. We've been taught that from day one. We are separate from our source energy and from one another. We are not separated from our source energy. We are one and the same as force energy. You could call that infinite intelligence. I call it infinite wisdom. We are part and parcel, still remaining a part of the energy source that created us in the beginning. So we are not separated. And the other falsehood is that we believe that we are not all equal. These 3 top falsehoods cause a lot of trouble on the planet. This is the trouble that it causes. We fill our bodies with toxic chemicals. We either do that as an escape mechanism to escape what we feel is the reality of our situation, or we fill our bodies with toxic chemicals because of the food we've decided to put in our body based on cultural teachings and what you're used to doing, even though we're teaching and we now know that most of the foods we consume are toxic chemicals and should not be put into a living organism. We fail to achieve self-validation. We fail to look into our own minds and consciousness for the answer to our questions. We remain sedentary, allowing our bodies to turn to mush. We fail to understand and practice unconditional love. And we do that because we don't understand the unbelievable power of unconditional love. We fail to learn natural law. If we followed natural law, we would not be feeding ourselves chemicals and sitting around turning to mush. We would follow natural law. Natural law is interesting. There are man-made laws and there are natural laws. If you break a man-made law, you can totally get away with it. For example, if you run a red light, and unless you bash into somebody or a policeman sees you, you're going to go on your merry way and get away with breaking a man-made law. But if you break a natural law, and the natural laws, we are going to cover exactly what the natural laws are. But basically, it's living a natural life based on nutritional excellence, and the nutrition is something that's not altered in a detrimental way by man. We must live by natural law. If we break the natural law, it will eventually come back to haunt us. If you're not eating correctly now, if you're not exercising now, believe me, in a few years, it will catch up with you. And you cannot escape breaking natural law. And then we fail to align ourselves with the higher order of nature. So all of this wounding derives from erroneous conditioning that we have accepted as truth, thinking that our success and indeed our survival depends on this body of actual falsehood. We have totally squandered our happiness. And we perpetuate that falsehood by unconsciously wounding our loved ones and ourselves day after day, month after month, year after year, and even though we put the blame on someone else, it's our own consciousness and our own minds that must solve these problems. We can blame our bosses or our government or crime in the neighborhood or the media, or we can blame our parents, or we can blame our spouses. We blame fate for dealing us a bad hand. And every day we face our negative perceptions, and every day we place ourselves on the throne of the victim. Every day we judge. Every day, knowingly or unknowingly, we teach the next generation the same chaotic worldview. Fortunately, this manner of living runs completely contrary to the natural way that is taught to us by nature. If you want to find the truth, peace, happiness, we need only become aware of the natural way. Once we achieve that kind of awareness, we can finally relax and enjoy our journey here in this life. It's never too late to enjoy the journey. In this awareness, we perceive our journey up until now as perfect motivation. And that right there is why I'm trying to teach your imperfections are perfect. because up until this time, you have not perceived your misfortunes or your problems as perfect motivation to change. Think about your life up to now. Would you say that it has been free of mistakes? Do you feel that there are people in your life who have wronged you? Do you feel that there is not one thing in your life that if you could go back and do over, you would do it differently? So how often do we think about these things? Without knowing it, we might think of them all the time, 24/7. Sometimes we feel sorry for all the mistakes we have made. Sometimes we find ourselves in toxic relationships, boring jobs, poor health, constant worry and conflict. But why should we feel this way? Soon, you will appreciate that these discomforts serve as a positive and definite purpose in your life, motivating you to take on a change of your point of view, a change of your perceptions. Now, I hope you're following this, because what I'm telling you is the answer. The answer is, we know you've been through hard times, but if you look at it in a different viewpoint, a different way, why not look at those discomforts, those things you judge as wrong or bad, why not look at that and say, there is my motivation to change? Because nothing happens without motivation. So turn your negative experiences into the motivation you need to proceed forward. Here is your project. No one's going to ask you to show them this list. You might take a picture of this or write it down. List the horrible things that you have experienced. I mean, what can we say? Oh, I struck out in Little League. Made me feel like crap. I didn't get this. I didn't get that. This person left me. I had a divorce. I have ill health. I lost my job. These are all the horrible things that have happened to you. Write them down. It's very important that you bring them out into your consciousness now. If you're going to understand this lesson, this teaching, now's the time to put yourself out there a little bit and write down for yourself or think in your own mind what horrible things have happened to you. Now, once you've done that, I want you to analyze these events and flip the pancake. Realize that here lies your motivation to change. And we don't do much without motivation. Soon, if you have this perspective, you will understand how I can say that everything is perfect. Now, previous to my understanding this, I would call my life a miserable failure. I have failed so many times at what I thought I should be doing, and I didn't do it. But now when I look back, I find out that that was the best thing that ever could happen to me, even when I didn't think so at the time. I didn't think my failures were lessons, but they were lessons that helped me keep progressing. And I want to give you just a real quick little story. And it seems a little bit simple, but I think it brings the point home. Back when I was in high school, I played football and I was on a football team. I was a quarterback, and we were doing well in our season. We had ended up with 7 wins and 3 losses, and that was pretty good. And I had a lot of good times during that. But the thing I remember the most was the very last play of the very last game that I have ever played football. It was the last game of the season, and we were on the 5-yard line. The score was 0-0. We were on the 5-yard line, and our running game wasn't going good. Our passing game was pretty well tied up. It was 0-0, and we were finally down on the 5-yard line. We had 5 seconds left, our last timeout, And I went over to the coach and I said, Coach, I can kick a field goal. Oh, you can kick a field goal. Yep. Are you sure? Yep. I got it. 5 yards, no problema. So he gave me permission to call the play, and it was for me to kick a field goal. So we lined her up. We got ready to go. And what happened was amazing, amazingly terrible. I forgot to tell someone to block the guys rushing from the corners, and they got in there on top of me so fast that I rushed the kick, and the ball went sailing like a wounded duck, 2 feet off the ground, wide left. Game over. My last game of the season, of my career, was a failure, a missed call, a mistake, a blunder. Me, it came down to me that we lost that game. And I thought that's the worst thing that could ever happen to me at that age. Fast forward 10 years later, I started to think about that game because it never left my mind. But I was in the middle of a case or learning to do surgery. And we had a lecture, and our instructor said, look, the thing you got to remember is you don't walk into the operating room as a surgeon. You have to become a surgeon. You have to practice. You have to study, and you have to practice, and you have to practice. And I remembered the field goal. What was the lesson? Number one, I let my ego take control of common sense. Number two, we had failed even the whole season to practice even one time kicking a field goal. So look at the lesson that I sat there and I said, I will become a surgeon because I am not going to let my ego get in the way, and I'm going to practice and practice and practice. So you can see how this is just a small little example in a story that I can tell you about how something you thought was the worst thing that could ever happen to you turns out to be the best. And that has happened many, many times in my life. Soon, you will begin to appreciate that everything is perfect. Everything is perfect. You are exactly the way the infinite wisdom, the infinite intelligence intended you to be. There is nothing else you need to know. You are at this moment a perfect human being functioning in a perfect environment that is built to sustain your life and your happiness. Project, tell us how empathy, self-validation, and unconditional love can assure your success. Self-validation is the only pathway to unconditional love and keys to your success. This is our project for you to start re-evaluating where you are and what you're going to do about it. Please start appreciating yourself. Start appreciating who you are and where you are and what potential you have. Because if you don't start having high self-esteem, if you don't start becoming self-aware of what your potential is, if you don't start validating your own consciousness, and if you don't start loving everything and everyone unconditionally, you will remain where you are and never evolve. So what have you learned today? You should take a picture of this or write it down And I hope that some of this has come on through to your consciousness so that you know for a fact on the day of your birth, you were perfect. That perfect little computer was then downloaded with negative detractors that have created a false persona. If you don't think you're a perfectly wonderful, amazing person, the negative detractors have taken over your thought processes, and that's a false persona. You're not a negative person. The false persona learned that love equals control, and love always comes with a price. What you want to learn is unconditional love. You can love everything and everyone in your environment without condition. Your life is chaotic because you now seek validation from outside sources. If you depend on outside sources for your validation, there will never in your life be something called the status quo, because the herd out there who you are depending on for your validation will always be demanding more, demanding different this, different that, and you have to be self-validated and practice unconditional love if you're going to evolve as a person. Remembering your pristine state of perfection renders you ready and receptive to practice unconditional love and become self-validated. It's because you were perfect, you went through some trials and error, which serve as perfect motivation for you to now reorient your thinking so that you become your own best friend. You become the one who validates yourself. Okay, we're going to see if you have any questions, because that's all I have to say about that. Okay, your message is perfect to hear today. I needed to hear this. Thank you. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I'm getting validation. It's nice to get validated sometimes, but yeah. So thank you so much for that message. Your message is perfect to hear today. I hope someone else thinks that too. Agreed, Jill. Thank you, Dr. Ashton. You are so welcome. So welcome. And great presentation, Doc. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. I hope you learned something. Let's keep going with this. Yes, thank you. I will be sharing this with a friend. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so any other comments there? I'm waiting. I'm waiting. I'm glad to see you all here today, and I think we'll probably do this again next Wednesday. We will let you know with an email, like always, and it will go probably Wednesday at 3 o'clock. Okay. Ready to shut it down. See you 1 week from today, 3 o'clock.